the evil story out of Santa Barbara. That crazy kid, that crazy man, and who was responsible. On line one from WABC in New York is Charles. Charles has an interesting point. Charles, go ahead, please. Thanks for joining the program.
Dr. Savage, you are the one and only. I love your work, and nobody can express and talk about this subject like you can. I really appreciate it.
Charles, before we begin, are you trained in the therapies of any kind? What are you?
Well, I am a non-psychiatrist physician, but as a general physician, I've done a lot of looking into this, looking into myself, and I've written extensively on the topic.
Ah, beautiful. So are you calling about the psychosexual elements that I hinted at?
Well, somewhat, yes. Let me tell you just where I'm coming from, and you know, the same nervousness that I feel when I call in the show or anybody else feels, or the same feeling we get if we see a cop in our rear-view mirror, it's the exact same mechanism that causes such a murderous rampage. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's always the result of fight or flight, and fight or flight is always related to some precipitating danger. And it's my premise is that the degree of the fight is directly, or even the flight, whether it's anger or rage as a flight, or murder as a fight, or if it's depression or withdrawal, the caller was calling about bipolar before, it directly correlates with the degree of danger. And it's my premise that mental illness, it can be traced to a very big danger. In this case, I will guarantee that something happened between birth and adolescence for this child. Not only the spoiled brats are a dime a dozen, but spoiled brats don't go around with these manifestos and blowing and shooting people up. And this particular spoiled brat, I can guarantee you, has a very strong danger experience that stems from somewhere birth to adolescence that causes him to have such a fight response. And
wait, let me see if I can digest for myself and others what you're saying, Doctor. He got a thrill, in other words, out of the killing. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm not saying that he got a thrill. Well, in some ways, actually, he did, because he was one-upping. He was one-upping the people, and that's a primitive reaction where we have to be. That's how we fight. We have to gain leverage, and that if we feel as though we're impotent or that somebody is one-upping us, it's our primitive instinct to fight. So that's a one-up danger.
But do you feel he was traumatized in his early childhood? Something was done to him?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, when you imply that, what do you mean? Someone in the family or someone close to him molested him?
Yes, I would say that somebody in his family, somebody who meant a lot to him, had to, because in order for this to be stored in his brain, because we learn what's going to be dangerous to as adults, we learn for the most part what's been stored to us during birth and adolescence. So something happened to him, whether he was, whether it was a loss of love, because we'll fight to the death to get that love. Whether it was somebody who molested him, probably it was a sexual. I would say it was probably a sexual trauma. Usually, if the fight is that severe, it usually is some type of trauma, and it's often a sexual trauma. And that's from my experience as a doctor, just treating regular people who have just trying to deal with life, and with different anxieties and stresses. And it's the same it's on the same spectrum as this mental illness. It just is that.
Charles, did you happen to hear yesterday's show where I talked about the psychosexual nature of this guy and his statements, and how a lot of men feel very similar feelings of rage towards women, but they don't act it out this way. They do it in different ways. Did you hear that?
I missed that. I'm sorry I missed it.
It was one of my best shows of all time, and my point is that misogyny is rampant amongst men, but so is the hatred of men by many women. And there's nothing new under the sun. It was always called a war of the sexes. But it doesn't always end in mass murder, does it? I mean, there's different ways to act out a feeling of rejection by girls. And I said yesterday that a guy who's healthy, who feels those senses of being rejected, goes out and says, I'll show them. And so he displays, like as you see in the animal kingdom, by becoming a fine artist, a fine doctor, a fine poet, a fine entertainer, a fine athlete.